you guys. Hello. I didn't expect to see you there. I'm the Tooth Fairy. And you might be asking, why is the Tooth Fairy doing the washing up? Well, I was here last night because one of the children in this house has lost a tooth. And I was here and I heard the mummy in this house saying in her sleep, "Oh, I wish there was a housework fairy." Well, you and I know that I'm afraid there isn't a housework fairy. We all have to do our bit to help our mummies and daddies in the house and keep it clean and tidy. But I thought this family could do with a little bit of extra help. So I came back tonight to give them a little hand. I love bubbles. Those sorts of bubbles and these sorts of bubbles. That's why I love doing the washing up. But I also love these sorts of bubbles. Let's see if I can do one. Ha! That's made me think of a story. Harry was as surprised as anyone else when it happened. He wasn't expecting it to happen. After all, he was only 4 and it was the first time he'd ever had bubble gum. He'd only done it because Elsie and her friends had said, "You're too little, you're too small, you'll never be able to blow a bubble." Well, that was the trigger. Poor Harry was fed up of being told he was too little and too small. It made him get so cross and so determined. So he put the bubble gum in his mouth and chewed and chewed. And then he trapped it between his teeth, stuck his tongue through and blew. See if I can do it. Little ones at first like that, but the more he practiced, the bigger they got, until he blew a really big bubble. And it got bigger, that it was nearly bigger than his mouth, and then it was nearly bigger than his head, and it was so big a gust of wind came and caught it and sent him scooting across the road, and then scooting across the street, and higher and higher and higher, until the bubble had him floating across the house rooftops and then across the whole town. Harry got really scared and he shut his eyes, and then he thought, "Whoa, no, I better hold on tightly with 2 hands." And then he shut his eyes, just screwed them really tight shut. Got very brave. And when nothing seemed to have happened bad after a while, he opened his eyes. Wow, the world looks so beautiful from up here. Oh my goodness, he was floating, holding on to the bubble gum bubble that he'd blown. That was a bit of luck on his first day of bubble blowing. That would show Elsie and her friends. Fancy telling him he could never blow any bubbles. Well, way down below, he could just about see them. Whoa, don't let go of the bubble. Don't let go of the bubble, he thought. But he really wanted to wave and say, "Hello down there, na, 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 I can do it." Well, Harry was beginning to enjoy himself, and he squawked with delight, "Ha ha!" as he sailed and flew past a load of seagulls coming in the other direction. They gave him a very funny look, but not as funny a look as the passengers of the light aircraft. And Harry got brave, and there was a low-flying aeroplane, and he waved in at the window and the passengers got a terrible shock and waved back again. Wow, he was really enjoying this flight. He'd never been up so high. This is what it must be like to be a bird, he thought. Down below, Elsie and her friends were beginning to get very, very worried. What on earth were they to do? As soon as they stopped bickering with each other and saying, "It was your fault. You should have grabbed his ankle before he got too high. Well, you shouldn't have told him he'd never do it. You should have grabbed his trouser leg." Well, as soon as they'd stopped bickering, they realised that they had to do something. And the first something they had to do was to tell a grown-up. They all knew they were probably going to be in trouble, so neither of them wanted, and any of them wanted to do it. In the end, it was decided that it was Elsie's brother, so Elsie should tell. So in she went to tell her mum and dad. Well, they were cross. But eventually Elsie got a word in edgewise, and she pointed out that it wasn't even her fault. It wasn't her that gave Harry the bubble gum in the first place, because she knew they weren't supposed to have it. Well, eventually Dad calmed down and he began to get his thinking cap on. What on earth were they going to do? How were they going to get his son down out of the clouds? He could let go of the bubble, but then he would come tumbling and crashing down and probably really, really hurt himself. So in the end, Harry's dad decided the best thing to do was to phone the emergency services. He grabbed his phone and rang the emergency services. Well, I think the emergency responder on the end of the phone must have thought Harry's dad was joking. She chuckled to herself. Well, who am I supposed to send? She said. The fire brigade with a really, really, really long ladder? Now, sir, you know these lines are not meant for hoax callers. You mustn't ring us for a joke. These are only for real emergencies. But this is a real emergency, said Harry's dad. Well, the emergency responder politely put the phone down. But the lucky thing is, did you know if you ring an emergency number, they have to send somebody out? Well, they must have thought pretty hard and send somebody out pretty quickly, because within 15 or 20 minutes, everybody could hear the of a helicopter. They looked up above the house and then ran out into the garden, and they could see the air ambulance circling around Harry and Elsie's house. Well, that was all the help they needed. Harry and Elsie and their mum and their dad jumped in the car and drove as fast as they could, following the air ambulance, with Elsie's mum hanging out the window on one side and Elsie hanging out the window on the other side so they could tell their dad which direction the helicopter was going in. They circled for a while, not really knowing where they were going. And then must have been that the people in the aeroplane must have reported back to the air ambulance people, because suddenly the air ambulance shot off in one direction and Harry's dad put his foot down on the accelerator, vroom, like this, and chased the helicopter through the lanes. They must have spotted Harry. It's lucky they did. Harry's balloon was beginning to get a bit small and Harry's arms were beginning to get a bit tired. It was good fun, but he sort of felt like he needed to come down now. And he was having the same thoughts in his head as Harry's dad had had. How on earth do we stop this thing? How on earth do I get down? I don't want to let go, thought Harry, because that's going to hurt. What should I do? What should I do? And just then, he could also hear. He looked around and spotted the air ambulance. Oh, fantastic. Oh, he was saved. Carefully, very, very carefully, the air ambulance drew up beside Harry and they threw him a very long rope, which Harry caught carefully. And they shouted at him, "Put the harness on!" So it's really hard to put a harness around you, floating in midair, holding on to a bubble. But somehow Harry did it, and he tied himself in to the harness, which was by now tied to the air ambulance, so he could finally let the bubble go. Just in time. It was getting too small to carry him, really. He was beginning to drop. The air ambulance guided him in, winched him in very, very carefully, and then found a safe place to land, as it happened, on the school playing field of Elsie and Harry's school. And that is how Elsie and Harry got to meet the people of the air ambulance, and that is how Harry ended up having a real balloon ride. He promised when he got down that he'd never do it again. There were reporters from the local paper. Somebody must have tipped them off. There were television cameras. There were journalists everywhere. And Harry told his story. And right at the very end, one of the reporters said, "And tell us, Harry, Will you be taking a ride like that again? And Harry's dad said, I don't think so, will you, son? And no, no, said Harry, I promise I won't. But Elsie was pretty certain that she saw Harry crossing his fingers and checking in his pocket for some more bubble gum. So I think he will have another adventure, don't you? You see if you can blow some bubbles on a bubble wand while I finish doing the washing up. Night night, everybody. I told that story for a little boy called Harry, who told me he was really, really keen to learn to blow bubbles with his sister's bubble gum, and his big sister Elsie, who's just learnt to blow her bubbles. And we started thinking about where those bubbles could take someone. If you've got any story ideas and you'd like me to work up a story for you, do send them in and let me know, and I'll see if I can make up a story just especially for you. Bye-bye, everyone.